Hey guys, Mr. Phil here with Math Made Easy. Today we're going to be talking about negative numbers and how to calculate with them using the four operations: addition, subtraction, multiplication, and division. Now, if you look behind me at the board, I've written down some number lines because I think that's a really common way to introduce the concept. It's a nice visual learning aid. Though I will mention, if you look at this board over here with the yellow bars, we normally see the number lines drawn horizontally like that, but I very rarely see them taught with vertical lines. And I think that's just an important idea to kind of integrate into your learning routine, because when we start graphing, we graph left and right, or horizontally and up and down, or vertically, for y values and x values. So I think it's important to see them both ways. If you're going to be using this concept as a visual learning aid, it might not hurt to implement that. So, but my point is that when it comes to calculational math, and we're actually going to have to deal with fractions, decimals, integers, and then also solve for things like x or a variable later. Having to draw a number line every time you need to calculate with a negative number can be very time consuming and therefore very frustrating. So I think there's a quicker way to go about it. As usual for me, when it comes to math problems, I like to look at the problem and what it's asking me to do, and then I try and come up with a list of steps that are easily repeatable. So I think that will be good for all you students who are in pre-algebra or in algebra who maybe feel like, you know what, I just never really got a hang of working with negative numbers. This might help. So let's go over some examples and some problems together. Let's see if we can come up with some ideas that might help you figure this out. So let's get to work. All right, guys. So we're talking about negative numbers, and I think we need to get into the calculational part. So these lessons are going to be really quick, but it's because I want to make them as simple as possible. So here I have our screen set up. At the top left, if you see, I have a plus and a minus, and that's because I want you to think of all the numbers that you've ever dealt with in calculations and that they always have signs. So there's two different cases when we're talking about addition and subtraction. So that's why they're here. We're talking about addition and subtraction of numbers, whether we have positive or negative numbers. So the first case we have is up here. What do we do if we have the same signs? Good question. Look on the left side here. Do you notice both of the numbers have the same sign? Positive 2, positive 4. Negative 2 minus 4, or negative 2 negative 4. So this is kind of a classic approach that I like to employ. What is the problem asking me? What do I need to do? So the problem here, the first problem, is asking me to take a positive 2 and add a positive 4 to it. We can use the number line like we talked about in the last video, or we can do a little diagnosis here. So here's how it works. If you have two numbers with the same sign, you simply take the integers 2 and 4 and add them together, 6. Then you say, okay, so I had a plus here and a plus here. That means my answer is plus. Perfect. That's all you need to do. It shouldn't come as a shock to any of us because we know that 2 plus 4 is 6. But here's the thing. It also works with the negative numbers. Negative 2, negative 4. We have the same signs, so I'm going to add the number 6. But in this case, of course, since both of my numbers are negative, the answer is going to be negative. So what do we do when we have the same sign? We add the integers, or add the numbers, and then the answer is the same sign. Pretty simple, right? What do we do if the numbers have different signs, though? What do we do if one number has a negative, like here a -1, and the other number is positive? Good question. Here's the answer. We subtract. You take the numbers 5 and 1. We're not worrying about the sign now. We're just going to subtract them. So if, like we've done or learned in the past, you always subtract from the bigger number. So we're going to start with 5 and take away 1, and I get 4. Now for this, it's a little bit trickier. You need to realize that 5 is bigger than 1, right? It's just a larger place value, so the sign of our answer is going to be the sign of the bigger number. So 5 was the bigger number. And remember, the sign of the number is always to the left of it. So 5 is positive, 1 is negative. Since 5 is positive and 5 is the bigger number, the sign of the bigger number wins. So the answer is positive 4. If you want to know what negative 1 plus 5 is, it's positive 4, and that's the quickest way to do it and think of it. You can, of course, draw the number lines like we've mentioned before, but I would beg to argue that it's just going to take, I don't know how many times longer, depends on how fast you can draw, but I think this way is much quicker. Same thing for this problem down here, opposite sign, so I'm going to subtract 5 minus 2, answer's 3, but this time the 5 is bigger. So since the 5 is bigger than 2, that means the sign of 5 is going to win, which is negative, so the answer is negative 3. So what do we do when we have different signs when we're adding and subtracting negative numbers? We subtract them. Like I said, because I know it's something not many students think about, when we learn to subtract without negative numbers, we were always given the bigger number first because it's impossible until we learn about negative numbers to subtract a bigger number from a smaller number. So we always learn to do the bigger number first, or we were always given the bigger number first. Didn't matter if we were doing integers, if we were working with fractions and mixed numbers or decimals, they always gave us the biggest number first. So one thing you need to get used to once negative numbers are introduced to you in calculational problems is that now the order doesn't matter. They can be given to you in any order. What you need to do is recognize which number is bigger and then which number is the sign, what sign is going to win when we're talking strictly about addition and subtraction. So just to recap, if the signs of the numbers are the same, you're just going to add them, and then the answer is going to be the same sign as what you started with. If it's plus, plus, your answer is plus. If it's negative, negative, your answer is negative. You just add up the numbers. 2 plus 4 is 6, answer is negative 6. 2 plus 4 is 6, positive, so it's positive 6. When we subtract, it's what we subtract when we have different signs. So if we have a negative and a positive, or it could be positive, negative, it doesn't matter what order we go in. We just know we have to subtract the numbers. So we did the biggest number, 5 minus 1 is 4. 5 is positive, so the sign of the bigger number wins, plus 4. In this problem, it's the opposite is true. 5 is bigger, but 5 happens to be negative. So since they're opposite signs, I'm going to subtract. The answer is 3. And since 5 is bigger and 5 is negative, the answer is negative. Whatever order you want to go in for that checklist, if you want to check the signs first and subtract, or you want to just subtract and then check the signs later, it really doesn't matter. As long as you check those two things, you're going to be fine. And that's all you need to do for addition and subtraction of numbers. Of course, I could throw in some decimal problems, or I could throw in fractions with mixed numbers. Actually, let's go over a fraction problem. I'm going to write it in red ink. And so I'm going to do something a little bit. Let's do like 4.5. And I'm going to say negative 4.5 plus, let's say, 3 7/8. I chose these numbers for a specific reason, but we're going to approach it the same way. These are opposite signs, right? Negative and positive. So what do we do when the signs are opposite? We subtract. And in order to subtract, of course, we need to do all our normal steps. We need to find a common denominator between 2 and 8. And 8 is a very nice number to use for both of these. So this 1/2 is going to become 4/8. And then the 3 7/8 I luckily do not need to change because it already has a denominator of 8. So now I want to subtract, but I cannot because we're not thinking about the signs just yet. So I obviously know the negative number is bigger here. 4 4/8 is bigger than 3 7/8. So I know my answer is going to be negative, but I need to work through this part right here. So I'm going to use some different color ink just to highlight what exactly I'm doing. And I'm trying to focus here on the 4/8 minus 7/8, because remember we said opposite signs, we're subtracting the numbers. We always subtract from the bigger number, and since 4 is bigger than 3, it's this number subtracted from, this number subtracted from this number here. But we can't do 4 minus 7. So if you remember our borrowing step, we take 1 away. And this is from a video I posted earlier on subtraction of fractions. This is something I called the borrowing step, where I take 1 away from the whole number here. I'll underline it. So 4 becomes 3. And then what you do is take the 8 and then you add it to the top. So 8 plus 4 is 12, and that becomes the new numerator. And then the bottom or the denominator stays the same. So now we changed it to 3 and 12/8, and then we have 3 and 7/8. So now we can subtract nicely. So 3 minus 3 is 0. Of course, you don't have to write that. And then 12 minus 7 is 5. So 0 and 5/8 is the numerical answer that we're going to get. Now, we're not finished because we still have to include the sign, but instead of writing 0 and 5/8, it just looks weird to me. I'm just going to make it nice 5/8, okay? So the last step we need to do is check, okay, what sign does our answer need to be? The negative number was bigger, so that means the sign of our answer is going to be negative, and then that is it. And that is all you need to do to add and subtract, whether it's fractions, decimals, working with negative numbers. Just learn those rules. If they're the same signs, you add the number. The answer is the same sign as the numbers you had in the problem. If they are opposite signs, you're going to subtract the numbers. You always subtract from the bigger number, and the sign of the bigger number wins. So that's a very important thing, and that's why I try to draw your attention to it. If you locate the bigger number, you're also going to pay attention to it more, which means hopefully you'll pay attention to the sign and know that when you check your answer, the sign should match the sign of the bigger number when in the problem the signs are opposite. So that's a lot to take in, but like always, to make sure that these steps become seamless and lightning quick, you need to practice them, you need to work on them and get faster at them and get more accurate at them. So I hope you can take these ideas and these tips and put them into practice, see what they can do for you. As always, I am wishing you well and I wish you good luck. I'll talk to you soon.